go on with our story to be sure that God does come through for His people. For in addition to that sudden factor, there is a serious factor. They're going to take her 2 children away as slaves. It was quite legitimate when one had a debt that he or she could not satisfy. The way the creditor would resolve that would be to take a member of the family and let them work off the debt. It's a practice that has been used throughout the centuries in many cultures. It was common in Israel. In fact, it was even permitted by the law. But you understand, this woman deprived of her husband did not want to be deprived of her sons. This woman, no longer in the presence of her adoring husband, did not want to be without the presence of her sons as well. This was serious business. Serious as a heart attack. This was no light, trivial matter. Many of the things that exercise our soul are things that will not matter 1 hour from now. Many of the things that we worry about are things that no one will think about 1 day from now. Many of the things that burden us at night will not matter when the sun comes up tomorrow. If we're honest, most of the things that we worry about never even happen. And if they do happen, they do not have the grave consequences that we think that they will have. But this was serious. This woman was dramatic, but she was not melodramatic. This woman was serious, but she was not hyperventilating. No, this was a considerable concern. This is a mother we're talking about. And these are sons that she is talking about. This was a serious matter. It's always serious when it's family. When it's somebody else's family, maybe our bowels of compassion are moved for a time to console them and to intervene in intercession for them. But the truth of the matter is, we're burdened briefly, in most cases, when it is someone else's family. But when it is our family, God Himself asked the question, can the womb forget her child? And the answer is no, this widow could not. This was a serious concern. It was a concern that mattered to her and her family. It's very interesting. How many of the miracles performed in this cluster of miracles in the life of Elijah and then Elisha relate to 3 things. You get clusters of miracles in the Old Testament around the life and ministry of Moses and the life and ministry of Elijah and his successor, Elisha. And so many of the miracles around Elijah and Elisha relate to 3 things. They relate to faith, they relate to finances, and they relate to family. This was a serious concern. A serious factor, a simple factor. What do you have in the house? It was a simple question that could be answered in a simple way. The answer is often not nearly as complex and convoluted as we think that it is. God has always made a way. He makes a way in the wilderness. With every temptation or trial, He makes a way of escape that we may be able to bear it. Chances are always good that God's answer is already there, and we're just failing to perceive it. It was a simple question with a simple answer. Well, all I have is just one little jar of oil, which leads us to the next factor, and that is the small factor. Little as much when placed in the master's hands, the old song says. Just 5 loaves and 2 fish the lad had, but thousands were fed that day on that hillside. God often works through the small things of life. And God uses the small things of this world to confound the big things of this world. God uses the foolish things of this world to confound the so-called wisdom of this world. God uses the weak things of this world to confound the so-called powerful things of this world. God often will use the small thing. The small thing. To Philadelphia, God promised an open door. A staggering opportunity of monumental proportions going forward. And yet, what did God say to Philadelphia? Jesus said, I know you have a little strength. A little strength. If we have faith that is as small as the proverbial seed of the mustard tree, God will use it to toss mountains into the sea. You don't need the monstrous. You, my friends, have an infinite God. You don't need the monumental. You have an almighty God. You don't need something bigger than all of your neighbors. No, you have a God who is the maker of heaven and of earth. It's not about the size of your faith. It is about the size of your God. It's not about the infinitude of your belief. It's about the infinitude of your God. It's not about how much you have. It's about what He has. He is all in all. There's a small factor. There's a social factor. God never leaves His people out of the equation. God always has a plan that involves people. Go to your neighbors and you ask from every one of them for their jars. Get every old jar, every container that they have. Don't just get a few. Get as many as you can possibly gather. Get as many people involved in this process as you can possibly get involved in this process. I love Bible balance. I love Bible balance because God's answer here and God's answer almost every time is this. One man and many men. One man and many men. One person and many people. God has a leader. But God not only has a leader, God has many followers. She goes to the man of God. And then the people of God are mustered. There is the leader of God's people today in His church, God's anointed, the pastor, and he better be followed if he's following God. But if he is followed, God raises up His church. And in a rarefied way, God's people do incredible things in an incredible moment. And they did so for this woman. And by doing so, every one of them shared in the miracle that was about to occur. It was steady. She went in and shut herself up with her sons, and she continued to pour into the containers. This woman never thought about an abatement. This woman never thought about a pause. This woman never thought about a work stoppage. This woman never thought about obeying God up to a point and quitting. This woman was not running a mental calculator thinking, well, we probably are good now. I probably got enough money to satisfy the creditor. He'll go on his way. I've got enough to keep him away from my door for a little while anyway. Oh no. Partial obedience is disobedience. Postponed obedience is disobedience. And so steady Eddie worked on. This woman continued at the business given to her by God. Spurgeon said, by perseverance, the snail reached the ark. God's people persevere, and God's people are blessed. I love what Eugene Peterson said about perseverance. It's long obedience in the same direction. Long obedience in the same direction. Don't you doubt in the dark what God showed you in the light. You be faithful. Don't you quit on God right now. Don't you stop because it's gotten different. Don't you quit because you think you're ahead. Don't you quit because you think that might be enough. No. You do what God told you to do. You fulfill your vows. Make your promises to God and keep them. Stay by the stuff. Put your hands to the plowshares and never ever look back. You wrap your hands around the horns of the mercy seat. You hang on until your knuckles are white. You say to God, I will not let you go until you bless me. I shall give you no rest. But be steady. Shut up. We mentioned it earlier. She shut the door behind her and her sons. Shut out every competing voice. There's no counsel against the Lord anyway. Shut out every other influence. You need none but the Spirit of the living God. Shut out every distraction. The devil doesn't need to send you into deep sin. All the devil needs to do is distract you. And there's a cacophony of competing voices and sounds in the world today. Shut it out. Shut it down. Shut yourself up unto God. Shut down by the world should mean for the servant of God. Shut up unto Him. Let's not miss the opportunity for what may be for many of us the longest season of prayer we've ever enjoyed in our lives. A shut up factor, a successive factor. They kept bringing them and they kept being filled. You see, we don't give up on God, and God certainly never gives up on us. We don't quit on God, and God certainly never quits on us. He visits the sins of the fathers to the third and the fourth generations, but He shows His mercy to thousands for generations. God never quits. God never stops blessing. God is one pent-up blessing for His people. God is not going to quit on you. God is not going to stop on you. He may discipline you, but He will not depart you. He may chasten you, but He will not forsake you, nor will He forsake me. He will keep on keeping on in our lives. And that means there's a sufficient factor. There aren't any more. The oil stopped. And the man of God said, go, sell the oil, and pay your debt, and you and your sons can live on the rest. You can live on the rest. God says, my grace is sufficient. My grace is sufficient. It's sufficient for our sin. Where sin abounds, grace does much more abound. It's sufficient for our sorrow. He's the God of all grace and consolation, who comforts us in all of our affliction, that we in turn may be able to comfort others who are in any affliction. Now, it's sufficient in every single case. Shut down, yes. Shut up. Well, now that's a choice. Or we shut up unto God.